The first birds had not yet begun their morning chorus when Neferet opened her eyes. She lay still for a moment on her sleeping mat, listening to the profound silence that filled the temple before dawn. This was her favorite time, these stolen moments before the world stirred, when she could hear the very breath of the goddess moving through the sacred halls. A soft weight pressed against her side. Warm, purring. She smiled and reached down to stroke the sleek head of Miu, the temple's eldest queen cat, who had claimed Neferet as her particular human 3 years ago, when Neferet had first arrived as a young initiate. Miu's fur was the color of desert sand touched by sunset, and her eyes held the ancient wisdom that all cats possessed, the knowledge they'd carried since Bastet herself had first walked the earth in feline form. "Good morning, little mother," Neferet whispered, scratching behind Miu's ears in the precise spot that made the cat's purr deepen to a rumble. "Is today the day?" Miu's belly was round and full, her kittens due any moment now. For the past week, Neferet had barely left the temple grounds, unwilling to miss the birth. In the house of Bastet, every cat was sacred, but a pregnant queen was especially blessed. Her kittens would be gifts from the goddess herself. Neferet rose carefully, not wanting to disturb Miu, though the cat simply rearranged herself in the warm spot Neferet had left behind, and continued her peaceful rumbling. The small chamber that served as Neferet's quarters was simple but comfortable. A sleeping mat with linen sheets, a small wooden chest for her few belongings, a clay lamp on a stand, and a niche in the wall where a small statue of Bastet watched over her with knowing eyes. The statue was carved from dark wood, showing the goddess in her cat form sitting upright and real, wearing a golden collar. The stone floor was cool beneath Neferet's bare feet as she crossed to the wash basin. The water in the large clay vessel was fresh from yesterday evening, cool and clean. She poured some into the smaller basin and splashed it over her face and arms, gasping slightly at the shock of cold. The sharp sensation helped clear away the last cobwebs of sleep. She dried herself with a length of linen, then reached for the clean dress folded on her chest. It was simple, as befitted a priestess. White linen, finely woven, that fell to her ankles in straight pleated folds. She slipped it over her head, feeling the soft fabric settle against her skin. Over this went a broader collar of blue and green faience beads, a gift from Merit, the high priestess, marking Neferet as a full priestess of the order. Her hair was her one vanity, long and dark, falling nearly to her waist when unbound. She brushed it carefully with a wooden comb, working out the tangles from sleep, then gathered it into a thick braid that hung down her back. Later, for the morning ritual, she would wear the ceremonial wig, but for now, simplicity suited the quiet hour. She rubbed a small amount of scented oil into her hands and arms. The oil smelled of lotus and myrrh, a gentle fragrance that wouldn't overwhelm the sensitive noses of the temple cats. Everything in the house of Bastet was chosen with the cats in mind. They were not merely animals here. They were the living embodiments of the goddess, each one deserving of respect and care. From the chest, Neferet retrieved her sistrum, the sacred rattle she'd received upon completing her initiation. It was bronze, shaped like a doorway with the face of Bastet at the top, and small metal discs strung on rods that chimed when shaken. She tucked it into her belt and finally felt ready to begin the day. The temple was beginning to wake as Neferet stepped out of her chamber into the colonnade that surrounded the inner courtyard. She could hear the soft footsteps of other priestesses emerging from their quarters, the distant murmur of morning prayers, the gentle splash of water as the novices filled the ritual vessels from the sacred pool. The courtyard itself was a place of tranquil beauty. Date palms grew at the corners, their fronds rustling in the pre-dawn breeze. Flowering shrubs filled the air with sweetness. A reflecting pool in the center caught the stars that still shone overhead, though the eastern sky was beginning to pale with the promise of sunrise, and everywhere, absolutely everywhere, were cats. They draped themselves along the walls like living decorations. They prowled through the gardens with the confidence of ownership, which in truth they possessed. They lounged on the warm stones, groomed themselves with fastidious care, played with each other in brief explosions of energy, or simply sat and watched the world with those knowing, mysterious eyes. Neferet counted 14 cats in the courtyard at a glance, and she knew their names and temperaments as well as she knew her own sisters in the priesthood. There was Copper, the massive tom with fur like burnished metal, who ruled the courtyard with benevolent authority. There was Lotus, the elegant young female who moved like flowing water. There was Old Shadow, nearly blind now, but still dignified, who had lived in the temple for 18 years. There were the 3 siblings, Moon, Star, and Sky, inseparable since birth. "Blessed morning, Neferet," a voice called softly, and Neferet turned to see Setnofret, one of the younger priestesses, carrying a large clay jar. "Blessed morning, Iset," Neferet replied with a smile. "The milk?" "Fresh from the dairy. I went myself to ensure it was the best." Isetnofret was 15, eager and devoted, though she still sometimes forgot the proper prayers or mixed up the order of rituals. But she had a genuine love for the cats, which was what mattered most. Together, they went to the preparation room, a long chamber off the courtyard where the cats' meals were prepared. Everything here was scrupulously clean, the stone surfaces scrubbed daily, the vessels washed and dried in the sun. Shelves held clay bowls of various sizes, each marked with a cat's name. Some cats required special diets. Shadow, with her age, needed softer foods. Copper, with his great size, needed more. The nursing mothers needed the richest milk and the finest cuts of meat. Neferet lit the oil lamps that hung from hooks in the ceiling, and warm light filled the room. From the storage jars, she began taking out the components of the morning meal. Dried fish from the market in Bastet, carefully deboned, fresh goat meat cut into small pieces, milk, bread soaked in broth for the elder cats, and fresh water from the temple's deep well. She and Zetnofret worked in comfortable silence, preparing each bowl according to the needs of its recipient. Neferet found a deep peace in this work. There was something profoundly satisfying about the simple, honest task of caring for these sacred creatures. Her hands moved with practiced skill, measuring, mixing, arranging. "How is Miu?" Isetnofret asked, glancing up from the bowl she was filling. "Any signs yet?" "She's very calm, very content. I think perhaps today or tomorrow." Neferet smiled, remembering the warm weight of the cat against her side. "She's chosen my chamber for the birthing, I think. She barely leaves it now. You're fortunate. When Lotus had her litter last year, she chose the linen storage room, and Merit nearly had a fit when she found kittens nesting in the ceremonial robes." Iset Nefret giggled at the memory, then clapped a hand over her mouth. "I shouldn't laugh. Merit was very gracious about it. Merit understands that we exist to serve the cats, not the other way around," Neferet said. "Even if it means finding kittens in unexpected places." When all the bowls were prepared, they carried them out to the courtyard. The cats, sensing breakfast, began to converge from all corners of the temple. They moved with that particular feline grace, unhurried but purposeful, their tails held high in anticipation. Neferet set down Copper's bowl first in the place of honor near the pool. The great Tom approached with dignity, touched his nose briefly to Neferet's hand in acknowledgement, and then settled down to eat. One by one, she distributed the other bowls, speaking softly to each cat, calling them by name, receiving their greetings. This was more than just feeding time. This was communion, a sacred act of care and connection. Each cat was an individual, a personality, a small manifestation of the divine. To serve them was to serve Bastet herself. The sky was brightening steadily now, the stars fading as the sun approached the horizon. The temple began to truly come alive. More priestesses emerged, beginning their morning tasks. Novices swept the courtyard stones. The sacred pool was checked and refreshed. Incense burners were lit, sending sweet smoke curling up to the heavens. Merit, the high priestess, emerged from the inner sanctuary. She was a woman of 50 years, her face marked with the lines of wisdom and laughter, her eyes sharp and kind in equal measure. She wore the full regalia of her office, the pleated linen dress, the broad collar of gold and carnelian, the ceremonial wig of black plaited hair. In her hand she carried a staff topped with the image of Bastet. "Neferet," she called, beckoning. "Come, it's time for the dawn prayer." Neferet handed the last bowl to Iset Nefret and hurried to join Merit and the other senior priestesses who were gathering at the entrance to the inner sanctuary. This was the holiest part of the temple, the chamber where the great statue of Bastet resided, where only the initiated were permitted to enter. They processed in single file, each priestess carrying a sistrum. The sound of the rattles filled the air, a rhythmic chiming that was both joyful and solemn. The sanctuary was dim, lit only by oil lamps, and the smoke of incense hung thick and fragrant. Myrrh, frankincense, and lotus flower. The scent of devotion. The statue of Bastet dominated the chamber. She stood twice the height of a man, carved from black granite, her cat head crowned with the solar disk and Uriah's serpent. She held a sistrum in one hand and an aegis in the other. Her eyes were inlaid with gold that caught the lamplight and seemed to glow with inner fire. Merit stood before the statue and raised her arms. The priestesses formed a semicircle behind her, Neferet among them. They shook their sistrums in unison, and Merit's voice rose in the ancient prayer. Ah, hail to you, Bastet, lady of joy, mistress of the house, goddess of the rising sun. You who protects the home and hearth, you who brings happiness to the hearts of your children, we praise you at the dawning of the day. We honor you with our service. We ask your blessing on all who dwell within these walls, both human and feline. Grant us wisdom to care for your sacred ones. Grant us joy in our labors. Grant us your protection against all harm. The priestesses responded in chorus, "May it be so, blessed Bastet, may it be so." The prayer continued, rising and falling like music, punctuated by the chiming of the sistrums. Neferet felt herself falling into the familiar rhythm, her voice joining with her sisters, her spirit lifting with each phrase. This was why she had come to the temple 3 years ago, leaving behind her father's house and the marriage that had been arranged for her. This sense of connection, of purpose, of touching something greater than herself. When the prayer ended, Merit turned to face them. "Go now, daughters of Bastet. Serve her with glad hearts. Care for her children. Bring healing where there is hurt, comfort where there is fear, joy where there is sorrow. This is our sacred duty. This is our holy work." They filed out of the sanctuary back into the courtyard, where the sun was just breaking over the walls, flooding the space with golden light. The cats had finished their breakfast and were now engaged in their morning grooming, washing faces with careful paws, smoothing whiskers, cleaning ears. Neferet returned to her chamber to check on Mew. The cat had barely moved, still curled in the warm spots on Neferet's sleeping mat. But when Neferet knelt beside her, she noticed that Mew's breathing had changed, become more focused, more deliberate. "Today, then," Neferet murmured, stroking the cat's head gently. "Today you'll bring your gifts into the world." She would need to prepare. Clean linen for the birthing nest, warm water and soft cloths, calming herbs to burn if Mew became distressed. And she would need to alert Merit, who would want to be present for the birth of temple kittens. But first, she had her other duties. The sick cats in the infirmary needed tending. The herb garden needed checking. There were prayers to be said at midday, and offerings to be made. Neferet was just stepping back into the courtyard when she heard the sound of running feet. One of the gate novices, a girl named Benarib, came rushing in, her face flushed with exertion and excitement. Priestess Neferet, Priestess Merit," she called, skidding to a halt on the smooth stones. "There's a royal messenger at the gate. He says he comes from Memphis, from the palace of the great king himself. He demands to speak with Merit immediately. He says it's a matter of utmost urgency." The peaceful morning shattered like dropped pottery. A royal messenger from Memphis, from Pharaoh Rameses himself. Neferet felt her heart begin to pound. In her 24 years, she'd never known the royal house to send messengers to the temple. What could possibly be so urgent? Merit appeared from the sanctuary, her face composed, but her eyes sharp with alertness. "Show him in, Benarib. Take him to the receiving chamber. Neferet, come with me. The rest of you continue your duties." As Neferet followed Merit toward the receiving chamber, she glanced back once at her chamber door, thinking of Mew waiting there, thinking of the peaceful morning that had been, thinking that somehow she knew with absolute certainty everything was about to change. The receiving chamber was one of the few rooms in the temple designed to impress visitors rather than comfort cats. The walls were painted with scenes of Bastet in her various forms, dancing with her sistrum, protecting the pharaoh, receiving offerings. The floor was polished limestone, cool and smooth. Carved wooden chairs with lion paw feet lined one wall, and a low table held a tray with cups and a pitcher of date wine for honored guests. The royal messenger stood in the center of the room, and even travel-worn as he was, he commanded attention. He wore the white kilt and broad collar that marked him as a servant of the palace, and a leather satchel hung from his shoulder, sealed with the royal cartouche. His head was shaved in the fashion of officials, and his face bore the dust and weariness of someone who had traveled through the night. He bowed deeply when Neferet entered, pressing his forehead nearly to the floor. "High Priestess Neferet of the House of Bastet, I bring greetings from Queen Nefertari, great royal wife of Rameses II, living forever like Ra. May the gods grant you life, prosperity, and health." Neferet inclined her head with grace. "Rise, messenger. You are welcome in the house of the goddess. I am Neferet, and this is Neferet, one of our most skilled priestesses. Speak your message. What brings a servant of the great house to our humble temple?" The messenger straightened, and Neferet saw the genuine distress in his eyes beneath the formal bearing. "High Priestess, I come on a matter of desperate urgency. The queen's beloved companion, a cat named Shadow, is dying. The palace physicians can do nothing. Every healer in Memphis has been summoned, and none can discover the cause of the illness. Shadow grows weaker by the hour, and the queen—" He paused, struggling for composure. "The queen weeps without ceasing. She has heard tales of the healers of Bastet, of priestesses who understand the sacred cats as no others can. She sends me to beg, High Priestess, to plead for your aid. Please send your most skilled healer to Memphis. If Shadow dies, I fear what grief may do to the queen's own health." Neferet was silent for a long moment, her face thoughtful. Neferet stood quietly beside her, her mind already racing. A sick cat, a royal cat, in the palace at Memphis, which was 5 days' journey by river. This was no small request. "Tell me of this illness," Neferet said finally. "What are the symptoms?" The messenger pulled a papyrus roll from his satchel and unrolled it with care. "The head physician, Tames, wrote this for me to carry. He thought the details might aid you." He held it out, and Neferet took it, her eyes scanning the hieratic script. After a moment, she passed it to Neferet. "Read this. Tell me what you think." Neferet took the papyrus, her fingers trembling slightly. The script was dense and technical, but her training had prepared her well. She read silently, absorbing the information. Shadow had stopped eating 7 days ago. The cat had become lethargic, refusing to move or play. There was no fever, no visible injury, no discharge from eyes or nose. The cat simply seemed to be fading away, losing interest in life itself. Various remedies had been tried, herbs to stimulate appetite, tonics to restore vigor, even magical incantations. Nothing had worked. "This is strange," Neferet murmured, looking up at Neferet. "It sounds almost like sorrow sickness, the way a cat might grieve after losing a beloved companion. But if Shadow is the queen's companion, surely the queen is still present. The queen has barely left Shadow's side, the messenger confirmed. She sleeps in the chamber where Shadow rests. She speaks to the cat constantly, offers every delicacy, every comfort, but Shadow turns away from it all. Neferet's mind worked through the possibilities. A physical ailment would show symptoms, fever, pain, some outward sign. But this listless fading, this loss of will, this suggested something else. Poison, perhaps, but not the kind that killed quickly. Something more insidious. Or a curse, a magical working meant to harm through the cat. She looked at Merritt and saw that the high priestess had reached the same conclusion. Their eyes met, in silent communication. "I will go," Neferet said quietly. "If you permit it, Merritt, I will travel to Memphis and tend to this cat." Merritt studied her for a long moment. "You understand this may be more than simple healing work? There may be danger in this, Neferet. Palace intrigues are deadly games, and if Shadow's illness is deliberate, you may be walking into the very nest of vipers." "I understand," Neferet said, and she did. But she also understood that a cat was suffering, and that was something she could not ignore. "Bastet would want us to help. All cats are sacred to her, but especially one who brings comfort to a queen." "And what of Miu?" Merritt asked gently. "Her time is very near. You may miss the birthing." The words struck Neferet's heart like a physical blow. She thought of Miu, waiting in her chamber, the kitten so close to arriving. She had been looking forward to this for weeks, had planned to be there for every moment. But she looked again at the messenger's face, saw the desperation there, thought of a queen weeping over a dying cat, and knew what her answer had to be. "Iset Nefret is capable. She can attend Miu in my place, and perhaps I will return in time. But if I do not, I trust that Bastet will watch over the birthing. This is her will, I think, to send me where I am needed most." Merritt nodded slowly, a hint of approval in her eyes. "So be it. Messenger, tell your queen that we send Neferet, our most skilled healer of cats, most attuned to their needs and natures. She will leave within the hour." The messenger's face flooded with relief. He bowed again, deeply. "The queen will be most grateful. I have a boat waiting at the dock. We can depart as soon as the priestess is ready." "Give us time to prepare," Merritt said. "Neferet will need supplies, medicines, protective amulets. Go to the kitchen and ask for food and drink. You look as though you have not rested in days." When the messenger had been led away by a novice, Merritt turned to Neferet and took both her hands. "Listen to me carefully, daughter. I am sending you because you have the skill, yes, but also because you have the wit. If this is poison, if this is curse work, you must be cautious. Trust no one at the palace, not the physicians, not the priests, not even the servants. Someone there wishes harm, and you do not know who." "I will be careful," Neferet promised. "Take the green amulet from the sanctuary, the one carved with the eye of Bastet. Wear it always. It will protect you from hostile magic." Merritt squeezed her hands. "And take your sistrum, Let them see that you are a true priestess, not merely a healer. You carry the authority of the goddess." They spent the next hour in furious preparation. Neferet packed a travel bag with linen dresses, her comb, a small statue of Bastet for prayer. Merit assembled a medicine chest, a wooden box with compartments holding carefully labeled pouches and vials, dried herbs for calming and for strengthening, oils for anointing, honey for wounds, willow bark for pain, crushed malachite mixed with oil for eye infections, a dozen other remedies, each one potentially useful. "And this," Merit said, pressing a small clay jar into Neferet's hands. "This is the antidote for aespo venom. I pray you will not need it, but if the cat has been poisoned, this may help. It counteracts many toxins. Give it mixed with warm milk, 3 drops to start, then 2 drops every few hours until the cat shows improvement, or until you are certain it is not poison." Neferet tucked the jar carefully into the medicine chest. "Thank you, Merit, for everything, for trusting me with this." "You have the skill and the heart for it," Merit said simply. "Bastet chose you for her service, and now she sends you on her errand. Trust in her, and she will guide you." They went to the sanctuary together for a brief prayer. Neferet knelt before the great statue and felt the weight of the green amulet as Merit hung it around her neck. The stone was cool against her skin, and she felt a pulse of energy from it, like the heartbeat of the goddess herself. "Protect your servant, great Bastet," Merit intoned. "Guide her hands in healing. Shield her from all harm. Let her be your instrument in the world beyond these walls." "May it be so," Neferet whispered. There was one more thing she had to do before leaving. She hurried to her chamber, where Miu still lay on the sleeping mat. The cat opened golden eyes as Neferet entered, and gave a small, questioning mew. "I have to go away for a while, little mother," Neferet said, kneeling beside the cat and stroking her head. "I'm sorry. I wanted so much to be here for your kittens, but another cat needs me, a cat who is very sick. I have to try to help her." Miu regarded her with those ancient knowing eyes. Then the cat reached out one paw and gently touched Neferet's hand. It felt like understanding, like permission, like blessing. "Iset Nofret will care for you," Neferet continued, her voice thick with emotion. "She's young, but she's kind and capable. And I will come back as soon as I can. I promise you I will come back." She kissed the top of Miu's head, feeling the soft fur against her lips, and rose. If she stayed any longer, she might not be able to leave at all. The other priestesses had gathered in the courtyard to see her off. They formed 2 lines, and as Neferet walked between them towards the gate, they shook their sistrums in blessing, the chiming following her like a song. Iset Nofret was crying openly, and even old Shadow had come out to watch, sitting with tail wrapped around paws in a posture of dignified farewell. The messenger was waiting at the gate with 2 donkeys, one for riding and one for carrying supplies. He helped Neferet secure her bags, and then they set off through the streets of Bastet. The city was fully awake now, the morning market in full swing. Vendors called out their wares, children played in the streets, The smell of baking bread and grilling fish filled the air. Neferet had always loved Bubastis, with its palm-lined avenues and its canals reflecting the sky, but she'd rarely ventured far from the temple. Now she was leaving it behind, heading into the unknown. They reached the river dock, where a good-sized boat was moored, its single sail furled, its crew of 4 waiting patiently. The boat was made of bundled papyrus reeds bound tightly together, the traditional craft of the Nile, painted with protective symbols on the prow. "This is the Queen's own vessel," the messenger explained as he helped Neferet aboard. "She sent her fastest boat to bring you back as quickly as possible." The crew cast off as soon as they were settled. The current caught the boat and began to carry them north, toward Memphis, toward the heart of power, toward whatever waited there. Neferet stood in the prow as Bubastis receded behind them. She could see the temple rising above the other buildings, its white walls gleaming in the morning sun, the smoke of incense rising like prayers. Then a bend in the river took them around a point, and the city vanished from view. She was alone now, truly alone in a way she had never been. Even the messenger, kind as he seemed, was a stranger. She clutched the green amulet at her throat and whispered a prayer. The Nile was beautiful, she had to admit, though she'd never traveled on it before. The great river rolled on, eternal and powerful, its waters the color of copper in the sun. The banks were lush with growth, papyrus marshes and date palm groves and fields of grain stretching away toward the desert hills. Herons stalked through the shallows. Crocodiles basked on muddy banks, watching the boat pass with ancient, patient eyes. The crew began to sing as they worked the oars, timing their strokes to the rhythm. It was a song about the river, about the gods who dwelled in its waters, about the journey of Ra across the sky each day. Their voices were rough but hearty, and despite her worry, Neferet found the sound comforting. The messenger, whose name she learned was Waset, proved to be good company. He told her about life in the palace, about the queen's kindness, about Shadow the cat, who had been with Nefertari since she was a young bride. Shadow was a gift from the queen's mother, Waset said, sharing bread and dried fish with Neferet as they sat in the shade of an awning. A tiny black kitten, all eyes and ears. The queen was only 16, then newlywed to Pharaoh. Probably frightened, though she'd never show it. Shadow became her comfort, her constant companion. They've been together for nearly 20 years now. That's why this is breaking her heart. Shadow is more than a pet. Shadow is family. I will do everything I can, Neferet promised. They traveled through the day, stopping only once to let the crew rest and eat. The sun blazed overhead, turning the river to molten gold. Neferet retreated to the shade and tried to rest, but her mind would not quiet. She kept thinking of Shadow, fading away in some palace chamber. She kept thinking of what Merit had said about danger, about poison, about palace intrigue. She thought, too, of Miu, hoped the cat was well, hoped Setnofret would know what to do when the kittens came. By late afternoon, the landscape began to change. The fields became more numerous. the villages larger and closer together. They passed other boats, some carrying grain, others carrying stone, still others filled with passengers. The river traffic grew heavier as they approached the great city. And then, as the sun began to sink toward the western horizon, Neferet saw it. Memphis, the ancient capital, the city of the white walls, the seat of pharaonic power. It sprawled along the western bank of the Nile like a sleeping giant. White-walled buildings rose in tiers from the waterfront. Palm trees swayed above gardens and courtyards, and dominating everything rising impossibly high into the sky were the temples. The great temple of Ptah, with its pylons and statues. The temple of Hathor, with its columns carved like lotus flowers. And beyond the city, in the desert to the west, the pyramids of the ancient kings stood in eternal silhouette against the red sky. Neferet had never seen anything like it. Bubastis was a respectable city, but Memphis was the heart of Egypt, the place where Pharaoh sat on the throne of Horus, where the most powerful nobles kept their houses, where the greatest priests performed the most sacred rituals. The boat slid up to a private dock, and Kayemweset helped Neferet onto the stone quay. Her legs felt unsteady after the day on the water. A litter was waiting, carried by 4 strong bearers with curtains of fine linen that could be drawn for privacy. "The palace is not far," Kayemweset said, "but the queen wishes you to arrive with dignity, as befits a priestess of Bastet." Neferet climbed into the litter, with her bags and medicine chest, feeling somewhat ridiculous, but also understanding the necessity. She was not just Neferet now. She was a representative of the goddess, come to the palace on holy business. The bearers lifted the litter smoothly and began to move. Through the gauze of the curtains, Neferet watched the city pass by. Broad streets paved with stone, massive gates flanked by guardian statues, gardens glimpsed behind walls. The sounds were overwhelming after the quiet of the temple. Voices shouting, animals braying, wheels clattering on stone, music drifting from taverns and houses. And then they were at the palace gates. Even having seen the grandeur of Memphis, Neferet was not prepared for this. The gates were enormous, bronze covered with gold, carved with scenes of Pharaoh triumphing over his enemies. Guards in ceremonial armor stood at attention, their spears glinting. Beyond the gates, she could see courtyards and colonnades, pools and gardens, all on a scale that made the temple seem tiny by comparison. Kayemweset spoke to the guards, showed some kind of token, and the gates swung open. The litter passed through into another world. The palace was a maze of buildings and courtyards, all connected by covered walkways. Everywhere Neferet looked, she saw wealth and power. Gold gleamed on every surface. Lapis lazuli and turquoise decorated the columns. Servants in fine linen hurried about their business. Officials in elaborate wigs conferred in small groups. The air smelled of incense and lotus oil and perfume. The litter finally stopped before a doorway guarded by 2 more spearmen. Kayemweset helped Neferet out, and she gathered her bags with as much dignity as she could manage. "The queen awaits you," Kayemweset said. "Follow me." They passed through corridors painted with exquisite murals showing the gods and the pharaoh, showing hunts in the marshes and festivals in the temples. They climbed stairs and crossed more courtyards. Finally, came Wasit stopped before a door of carved cedar. "The queen's private chambers," he said softly. "She requested that you be brought to her immediately upon arrival. Are you ready?" Neferet took a deep breath, clutched her medicine chest, touched the amulet at her throat, and nodded. Wasit knocked softly, and a voice from within called, "Enter." The door opened, and Neferet stepped into the presence of the most powerful woman in Egypt, into a chamber where a cat lay dying, into a mystery that would test everything she knew about healing and about life itself. The chamber was like nothing Neferet had ever seen. The walls were painted with scenes of gardens and birds, so lifelike she half expected the painted doves to take flight. The floor was covered with woven mats dyed in rich colors soft beneath her feet. Carved wooden furniture inlaid with ivory and gold stood arranged around the room. Oil lamps burned in elaborate stands, casting warm light over everything. And the scent, oh, the scent was intoxicating. Lotus and myrrh and something else, something rare and precious that she couldn't quite identify. But Neferet barely noticed any of this. Her eyes went immediately to the woman kneeling on the floor beside a low couch, and to the small black form lying motionless upon white linen. Queen Nefertari, great royal wife, mother of Egypt, looked nothing like the grand images Neferet had seen carved on temple walls. There was no crown, no elaborate wig, no ceremonial regalia. Her hair hung loose and dark around her shoulders. She wore a simple white dress, wrinkled and stained. Her face, which must have been beautiful once, was haggard with grief. Her eyes were red and swollen from weeping. But when she looked up at Neferet, there was still majesty there, still power. Even in her sorrow, even dressed simply, she was unmistakably a queen. "You are the priestess from Bubastis?" Her voice was hoarse, rough with emotion and exhaustion. Neferet bowed deeply, pressing her forehead nearly to the floor as protocol demanded. "I am Neferet, priestess of Bastet, your majesty. I have come as quickly as I could. Rise, please, there's no time for formality." The queen's hand gestured impatiently. "Come, look at her. Tell me if there's anything at all you can do." Neferet rose and approached the couch, setting down her medicine chest carefully. The cat lying there was small, delicate, with fur as black as the desert night. Shadow! Even in her weakened state, there was an elegance to her, a refinement that spoke of years spent in comfort and love. "May I touch her, your majesty?" "Please, do whatever you need to do." The queen moved aside slightly, giving Neferet room, but keeping one hand resting gently on Shadow's side, as if afraid to let go. Neferet knelt beside the couch and extended her hand slowly, letting Shadow catch her scent. The cat's eyes opened just slightly. They were green, the color of new papyrus shoots, but glazed and distant. She made no move to react to Neferet's presence, which was itself a bad sign. Even sick cats usually responded to new people in their territory. Gently, Neferet placed her hands on Shadow's body. The cat was far too thin. She could feel every rib, every vertebra. The fur, which should have been sleek and glossy, was dull and brittle. Shadow's breathing was shallow and rapid. Her heartbeat, when Neferet found it with careful fingers, was weak and irregular. "When did she last eat?" Neferet asked, her voice quiet and focused. 8 days ago, a small piece of fish. Before that, she had been eating less and less for perhaps a week. Now she takes nothing. Not fish, not meat, not even cream. I've tried everything she loves." The Queen's voice broke. "She just turns her head away." "And water?" "A little, sometimes, when I moisten her mouth with a cloth. But not enough, not nearly enough." Neferet continued her examination, checking Shadow's gums, which were pale, checking her eyes, which showed no discharge, running her hands along the cat's legs and belly, feeling for any sign of injury or swelling. She found nothing obvious, no broken bones, no wounds, no abscesses. The cat was simply fading, as if life itself was draining away from some invisible wound. "Oh, has anything changed in her environment? New plants, new servants, anything unusual at all?" The Queen thought for a moment, her brow furrowed. "Nothing. Everything has been as it always is. The same routine, the same rooms, the same people attending us. I can think of nothing different." Neferet sat back on her heels, thinking. This could still be poison, but if it was administered so gradually and subtly that the symptoms masked themselves as simple wasting. Or it could be a curse, a magical working that bypassed the body and attacked the spirit directly. Or, and this seemed increasingly likely, it could be both working together. "Your Majesty, I must ask you a difficult question. Is there anyone who might wish you harm? Anyone who might seek to hurt you through Shadow?" The Queen's eyes widened slightly. "You think this is deliberate? That someone did this to her? I cannot be certain yet. But the pattern of symptoms, the lack of any physical cause, it raises questions. In Bastet's temple we are taught that cats are sensitive to more than just the physical world. They sense intentions, emotions, even magical workings. If someone wished to harm you, to curse you, they might choose to work through your closest companion. The bond between you and Shadow is strong. To hurt her is to hurt you." Nefertari closed her eyes, pain and anger warring on her face. "The palace is full of politics, full of ambition. There are those who resent my influence with Pharaoh, who would prefer a different voice in his ear. The new vizier, Setnacht, he has never liked me. He believes women should be silent and decorative, not counselors. And there are others, nobles whose petitions I have opposed, priests whose schemes I have uncovered. But to do this..." She looked down at Shadow, her hand stroking the cat's head with infinite gentleness. "To harm an innocent creature, to strike at me. It's monstrous." "It is," Neferet agreed quietly. "But if it is true, then we know 2 things. First, that your enemy is willing to be patient, to work slowly and carefully. This is not the action of someone impulsive. Second, that they have access to either poison or curse work or both, which means they have resources and knowledge. What can you do? Can you save her?" The Queen's eyes were desperate now, pleading. "Please, I know I have no right to beg. that my rank means nothing before the goddess, but I am begging you. Shadow is all I have that is truly mine. Everything else belongs to Egypt, to Pharaoh, to duty, but Shadow is mine, and I am hers. Please don't let her die." Neferet felt the weight of that plea settle over her like a physical thing. She looked down at the dying cat, at the queen who loved her, and made her decision. "I will do everything in my power, your majesty. I make no promises except this. I will not give up while Shadow still breathes. But I will need time, and I will need your patience. If this is poison, I have remedies that may help. If this is curse work, I will need to consult with other priests, perhaps perform rituals of protection and cleansing. And if this is both, then we fight on two fronts." "Anything," the queen said. "Whatever you need, tell me, and it is yours." Neferet opened her medicine chest and began taking out components. "First, I will try the antidote for toxins. It is made from many herbs and is effective against most poisons. If Shadow responds, we will know we are dealing with something physical. If she does not, we look to magical causes." She measured out 3 drops of the antidote into a small clay cup, then added warm water from a pitcher on a nearby stand. The liquid turned slightly milky, taking on a bitter herbal scent. She stirred it with her finger, whispering a prayer to Bastet as she did so. "I need to get this into her mouth. It may be difficult if she resists." "She won't resist much," the queen said sadly. "She has no strength left to fight." It was true. When Neferet carefully pried open Shadow's jaw and trickled the mixture onto her tongue, the cat barely reacted. Her throat worked weakly, swallowing by reflex more than intention. Neferet gave her the entire dose, then sat back. "Now, we wait. If it is going to help, we should see some change within a few hours. Her breathing might strengthen, or she might show more awareness. Even a small improvement would tell us we're on the right path." The queen nodded, resuming her position beside the couch, her hand returning to rest on Shadow's side. "I will wait as long as it takes." Neferet settled onto a cushion nearby, watching Shadow intently. The light from the oil lamps flickered and danced, making shadows move across the painted walls. Outside, she could hear the distant sounds of the palace, voices and footsteps and the eternal whisper of wind across stone. They sat in silence for a long while. Neferet found herself studying the queen more closely now that there was time. Nefertari was older than Neferet had expected, perhaps 40 years, with lines at the corners of her eyes and mouth. But there was a strength in her face and intelligence in her eyes that spoke of a keen mind and a will of iron. This was no decorative queen content to sit in the women's quarters. This was a woman who ruled beside her husband, who was respected and feared in equal measure. "How long have you been a priestess?" the queen asked suddenly, her voice quiet. 3 years, your majesty, though I have studied healing since I was a child. My mother was a midwife, and she taught me about herbs and remedies. When I came of age, I chose to enter the temple rather than marry. Bastet called me, and I answered. You gave up marriage for the goddess? That must have taken courage. I imagine your family was not pleased. Neferet smiled slightly. My father was disappointed. He had arranged a match with a merchant's son. A good match, prosperous and respectable, But I couldn't do it. I couldn't spend my life in a merchant's house bearing children and managing servants when I felt Bastet pulling at my heart. So I ran away to the temple and begged Merit to take me as an initiate. And she did, after testing me thoroughly. Merit is kind, but she's not foolish. She needed to be sure I was truly called, not just running from responsibility. She had me work in the temple for a full year as a servant, cleaning and cooking and tending the cats, before she would even consider accepting me as a novice priestess. By the end of that year, I was certain this was where I belonged. The queen nodded slowly. I understand that. The certainty of purpose, I felt it when I married Rameses. I was very young, barely 16, and terrified. But I knew that this was my destiny, to be Egypt's queen, to stand beside him and help shoulder the burden of rule. Not everyone understands that kind of calling. They fell silent again. Neferet checked Shadow periodically, feeling for her pulse, listening to her breathing. There was no change yet, but it was too soon to tell. Poisons took time to be counted. A soft knock at the door interrupted the vigil. The queen called, "Enter!" and the door opened to admit a man in the white linen of a physician. He was perhaps 50 years old, with a shaved head and a pinched, sour expression. His eyes swept the room and landed on Neferet with immediate disapproval. "Your Majesty, I heard that a person had arrived from Bubastis." His tone made it clear what he thought of that person. "I came to ensure that nothing inappropriate was being done to the royal cat." "Ah, Toms," the queen said, her voice flat and cold. "This is Neferet, priestess of Bastet and a skilled healer. She is here at my request. She is attempting remedies that you and your colleagues were unable to provide." Tommies drew himself up, bristling. "With all respect, Your Majesty, I am the head physician of the royal household. I have trained for decades in the healing arts. This girl is a temple priestess, which is to say she waves incense and chants prayers. She has no business treating Shadow. If the cat dies because of her incompetence, it will be a scandal." Neferet felt anger flare in her chest, but she kept her voice level. "With respect, physician, I am applying an antidote for toxins that has proven effective in many cases. If Shadow has been poisoned, this may save her life. If she has not, it will do no harm." "Poisoned?" Tom scoffed. "Ridiculous. The cat is simply old and failing. It happens. Even royal cats are mortal. I told Her Majesty this days ago, but she refused to accept it." "Shadow is only 20 years old," the queen snapped. "That is not ancient for a cat, and I will not simply accept her death without trying everything possible to prevent it. Neferet stays. You may go." Thomas's face reddened. "Your Majesty, I must protest. The reputation of the royal physicians, my reputation, is at stake. If this priestess fails, it will reflect poorly on all of us." "Then let us hope she succeeds," the queen said icily. "Now leave us. You are dismissed." For a moment, Neferet thought Thomas might refuse. His face worked with suppressed rage and his hands clenched at his sides, but one did not defy a direct command from the queen. He bowed stiffly and left, the door closing behind him with more force than necessary. "I apologize for that," the queen said when he was gone. Tommies is skilled in his way, but he is also proud and resentful of anyone who might diminish his status. He has been particularly difficult since I suggested that his treatment of Shadow was inadequate. It's all right, Your Majesty. I have encountered such men before. They believe that because they have studied in halls and temples, they know everything. But sometimes the wisdom passed down through generations of healers, through simple work with herbs and animals, is just as valuable. More valuable in this case, the Queen said, looking down at Shadow. All his learning did nothing to help her. Neferet frowned, thinking about Tom's. His hostility seemed excessive, even accounting for wounded pride. And there was something about his manner, the way he'd been so quick to dismiss the idea of poison, that struck her as suspicious. Was it possible? Could the head physician himself be involved in Shadow's illness? She filed the thought away to examine later. For now, she needed to focus on the cat. As the evening wore on, servants came and went, bringing food and drink for the Queen and for Neferet. The food was incredible, far beyond anything Neferet had ever tasted. Roasted duck glazed with honey, bread so fine and white it seemed to melt on the tongue, grapes and figs, cakes sweetened with dates. She ate sparingly, not wanting to seem greedy, but it was difficult to resist such delicacies. The Queen barely touched her food. She kept her vigil beside Shadow, speaking softly to the cat, telling her stories, reminiscing about their years together. Neferet found herself moved by the Queen's devotion, by the love so evident in every word and gesture. As night deepened and the palace grew quieter, Neferet administered another dose of the antidote. Shadow swallowed it more easily this time, which might have been a good sign, or might have meant simply that she was too weak to resist. "You should rest, Your Majesty," Neferet said gently. "I will watch over Shadow tonight. If there is any change, I will wake you immediately." "I can't sleep," the Queen said. "Not while she's like this. Every time I close my eyes, I fear she'll be gone when I open them." "Then at least lie down on the couch there. Close your eyes for a while. You must keep your strength up. Shadow needs you to be strong for her." Reluctantly, the Queen agreed. She moved to a couch across the room, lying down, but keeping her eyes fixed on Shadow. Within minutes, exhaustion claimed her, and she fell into a restless sleep. Neferet remained beside Shadow, one hand resting lightly on the cat's side, feeling the faint flutter of heartbeat and breath. She whispered prayers to Bastet, asking for guidance, for strength, for a miracle. The hours crept by. Oil lamps burned low, and were replaced by servants who moved like ghosts through the chamber. The palace settled into its night rhythms, and still Neferet watched and waited. It was sometime in the darkest part of the night, when even the stars seemed to dim, that she felt it, a change, subtle, almost imperceptible, but there. Shadow's breathing had strengthened just slightly. The rhythm was more regular, and when Neferet felt for the heartbeat, it was steadier, stronger. She leaned closer, hardly daring to believe it. "Shadow," she whispered, "can you hear me, little one?" The cat's eyes opened, not fully, just a crack, But they focused on Neferet's face, and in that green gaze there was awareness that had been missing before. Recognition of another living being. "Good girl," Neferet breathed. "That's it. Come back to us. Fight." She mixed another dose of the antidote, this time adding a small amount of honey to make it more palatable. Shadow took it without resistance, and afterward her tongue came out to lick her lips. A small gesture, but so encouraging. By the time dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, there was no doubt. Shadow was improving. Still desperately weak, still far from well, but no longer actively dying. The antidote was working, which meant poison had indeed been used. The queen woke with the first light and immediately sat up, her eyes going to Shadow. "Is she alive?" Neferet said, unable to keep the smile from her face. "And improving. The antidote is working, Your Majesty. Shadow was poisoned, but we've caught it in time. With continued treatment, she should recover." The queen's face crumbled and she began to weep. Not tears of grief this time, but of relief, of joy, of gratitude. She came to the couch and knelt beside it, gathering Shadow into her arms with infinite care, pressing her face against the cat's fur. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you, Bastet. Thank you, Neferet. Thank you." Neferet felt her own eyes sting with tears. This was why she had become a healer. For moments like this, when life triumphed over death, when love was rewarded with hope. But even as she savored the victory, a darker thought intruded. Shadow had been poisoned deliberately, which meant someone in the palace, someone with access to the queen's chambers, was an enemy. And that enemy, whoever they were, would not be pleased that their plan had failed. Neferet was going to have to be very careful from now on. The mystery of who had poisoned Shadow was far from solved, and whoever had done it might try again. The cat was saved for now, but the danger was far from over. The morning brought a flurry of activity to the queen's chambers. Word had spread somehow that Shadow was recovering, and servants arrived with fresh linens, with bowls of water, with offerings of food for the cat. The queen's handmaidens appeared, clucking with relief and joy, fussing over their mistress, who had barely eaten or slept in days. Neferet found herself suddenly at the center of attention, receiving thanks and praise that made her uncomfortable. She was not accustomed to such notice, preferring the quiet routine of the temple where her work spoke for itself. But she accepted the gratitude with as much grace as she could muster, always redirecting credit to Bastet, reminding everyone that she was merely the goddess's instrument. Shadow was still terribly weak, but the difference from the night before was remarkable. Her eyes were open and alert now. She lifted her head when the queen spoke to her. She even managed a faint purr when Neferet stroked her head. It would be a long recovery, weeks perhaps, but barring any complications, Shadow would survive. "You must be exhausted," the queen said to Neferet as the sun climbed higher and the chamber filled with golden light. "You've been awake all night. Let me have chambers prepared for you. You need proper rest, proper food, time to refresh yourself." "That would be most welcome, Your Majesty," Neferet admitted. Now that the crisis had passed, she could feel the weight of exhaustion settling over her like a heavy cloak. Her eyes burned with fatigue, and her back ached from sitting on the floor all night. "Seneb," the queen called to one of her handmaidens, "prepare the guest chambers in the east wing for Priestess Neferet, the ones overlooking the garden, and have a bath drawn with fresh linens and whatever else she might need." The handmaiden bowed and hurried away. The queen turned back to Neferet with a serious expression. "Before you rest, I need to know your thoughts. You said Shadow was poisoned. How can we discover who did this? And more importantly, how do we prevent them from trying again?" Neferet glanced at the other servants in the room, lowering her voice. "Perhaps we should discuss this more privately, Your Majesty. The fewer people who know the details, the safer we all are." Understanding flickered in the queen's eyes. She dismissed the servants with a wave, keeping only one elderly handmaiden named Tawi, who had served her since childhood. When the room was clear, she gestured for Neferet to continue. The poison was administered over time, gradually, which suggests someone with regular access to Shadow. It was also sophisticated enough to mask its symptoms as natural decline. This speaks of knowledge, of skill in such matters, and it speaks of patience and planning. "Tom's," the queen said immediately. "He had access. He examined Shadow every day. He could have been poisoning her even while pretending to treat her." "It's possible," Neferet agreed. "His reaction last night was suspicious. He seemed very eager to dismiss the idea of poison. But we must be careful about making accusations without proof. Thomas is not the only possibility. Who else had access to Shadow? Who feeds her? The servants bring food from the kitchens, but I always taste it first to ensure it's safe. Old habit from my early days at court, when poison was a more common concern." The queen's face was grim. "But Shadow drinks water from the garden fountain sometimes, and she wanders the private courtyards freely. Anyone with access to those areas could have contaminated the water or left poisoned treats. Then we need to limit her access for now. Keep her here in your chambers, where you can watch everything she consumes, and I need to investigate. I need to examine the gardens, the fountain, anywhere Shadow frequented. There may be physical evidence, traces of the poison or the plants used to make it." "I'll have Tawi escort you," the queen said. "She knows the palace better than anyone, and she can be trusted absolutely. But first, please rest for a few hours. You're no good to anyone if you collapse from exhaustion." Neferet wanted to argue, wanted to begin the investigation immediately, but she knew the queen was right. She was swaying on her feet, her thoughts fuzzy with fatigue. "A few hours, then. But I want to begin before dark. Evidence is easier to find in daylight." The guest chambers were beautiful beyond anything Neferet had imagined. A large room with walls painted to look like a garden, with birds and flowers and trees rendered so skillfully they seemed almost real. The floor was covered with soft mats, and a proper bed stood against one wall. Not just a sleeping mat, but an actual frame, with a mattress stuffed with something wonderfully soft, covered in linen sheets so fine they felt like water against her skin. But the most miraculous thing was the bath. Servants had filled a large copper tub with warm water scented with lotus oil, and they'd left soft cloths and a cake of perfumed soap beside it. Neferet had never bathed in anything but the temple's communal washing pool or the occasional splash in a basin. A whole tub of warm water just for her seemed impossibly luxurious. She stripped off her dress, now wrinkled and stained from the long night, and stepped into the water. It was perfect, just hot enough to soothe her aching muscles. She sank down until the water covered her shoulders and let out a long sigh of pure bliss. For a while, she simply soaked, feeling the tension drain away. Then she scrubbed herself thoroughly with the soap, washing away the grime of travel and the long vigil. She washed her hair too, working her fingers through the tangles, rinsing until it felt clean and smooth. When she finally emerged from the bath, she felt almost human again. A servant had left a clean dress laid out on the bed, finer than anything Neferet owned, with delicate pleating and a broad collar of blue beads. She dressed, combed out her hair, and braided it loosely, and then, because she couldn't resist, lay down on the bed. The mattress seemed to embrace her. The sheets smelled of sun and cedar. She intended to rest for just a few minutes, just long enough to gather her strength. But exhaustion pulled her down into sleep before she could form another thought. She woke to find the sun had moved considerably across the sky. Afternoon then. She'd slept for several hours. For a moment, she felt guilty, but then she stretched and realized she felt better than she had in days. Rested, clear-headed, ready to work. There was food waiting on a small table. Fresh bread, soft cheese, dates, and a cup of something that smelled sweet and spiced. She ate quickly, grateful for the sustenance, and then went to find Towi. The elderly handmaiden was waiting in the corridor outside, as if she'd known Neferet would wake soon. Her face was kind and wrinkled like dried fruit, her hair white as linen. "The queen said you wished to see the garden's priestess," Towi said in a voice that creaked with age but held an undercurrent of steel. "I'm to take you anywhere you need to go and keep the curious away while you work." "Thank you, Towi. I appreciate your help. Can you show me where Shadow usually goes? The places she visits most often?" "Certainly. Follow me." The palace gardens were extensive, a series of interconnected courtyards and walkways all lush with growth. Date palms provided shade. Flowering vines climbed walls and trellises. Pools reflected the sky, and fountains splashed musically. It was beautiful, peaceful, a green oasis in the heart of the white-walled palace. Towi led her to a private courtyard attached to the queen's chambers. "This is where Shadow spends most of her time when Her Majesty is occupied with court business. The cat can come and go through that small door there." She pointed to a low opening in the wall, just big enough for a cat. And she drinks from the fountain, naps in the shade of that palm, and sometimes hunts the birds that come to the water." Neferet began her examination. She walked slowly around the courtyard, looking carefully at every plant, every stone, every corner. Most of what she saw was harmless. Lotus flowers in the pool, date palms, grapevines, flowering shrubs that perfumed the air, common garden plants, none of them toxic to cats. But then, near the fountain, she found something. A plant growing in a clay pot tucked half behind the fountain's base, almost hidden. It was small, unremarkable at first glance, with narrow leaves and tiny white flowers, but Neferet recognized it immediately. Oleander. Every part of the oleander plant was deadly poisonous. A single leaf could kill a full-grown man if ingested. For a cat, even a tiny amount would be lethal, and here it was, growing in the queen's private garden where Shadow wandered freely. "Towie," Neferet said quietly, "does this plant belong here? Is it part of the regular garden plantings?" The elderly woman peered at it, frowning. "No. I have tended these gardens for 30 years, and that's never been here before. Someone must have put it there recently." Neferet knelt beside the pot, examining it more closely. The plant had been placed deliberately, she was certain. The pot itself was different from the others in the garden, cruder, less decorative. And its position, tucked behind the fountain, where it wouldn't be immediately noticed, but where a cat might brush against it or even nibble at it out of curiosity, was too perfect to be accidental. "Don't touch it," Neferet warned as Towie reached toward the plant. "It's oleander, extremely poisonous. Even handling it can be dangerous if you have cuts on your hands." She looked around for something to use and found a sturdy palm frond lying nearby. Using it as a tool, she carefully tipped the pot over. The soil spilled out, and with it came evidence that made her heart beat faster. Mixed into the dirt were what looked like crushed leaves and flowers, a concentration of plant material far beyond what would naturally fall from the growing plant. Someone had deliberately prepared poison soil, probably watering the plant with water that had oleander leaves steeped in it, creating a concentrated toxin. "This is how it was done," Neferet said, her voice grim. "Shadow must have investigated this pot, maybe pawed at the soil or rubbed against the plant. The poison would have gotten on her fur, and when she groomed herself, she ingested it. A little bit every day, building up in her system until it nearly killed her. Who would do such a thing?" Toy's face was pale with shock and anger. Who would come into the queen's private garden and plant poison? Someone with access to this courtyard, someone who could come and go without raising suspicion, someone who knew Shadow's habits well enough to place the pot exactly where she would encounter it. Neferet stood and looked around the courtyard more carefully now, looking not at plants but at access points. The courtyard was private, attached directly to the queen's chambers, but it had several entrances. The door from the queen's rooms, the small cat door, a gate that led to a service corridor for the servants who tended the garden, and a larger gate that opened onto a covered walkway connecting to other parts of the palace. "Who uses these gates?" Neferet asked, pointing to each in turn. "The queen and her handmaidens use the main door from her chambers. The servants use the service gate when they need to water plants or clean the fountain, and that walkway gate is used by anyone moving between the royal apartments and the administrative buildings. Officials, priests, physicians, scribes, all manner of people pass through there daily. So many possibilities. Too many. Whoever had placed the oleander could have been any one of dozens of people, but they would have needed to know Shadow's habits, which meant they had been watching, studying, planning. Is there any way to know who's come through that walkway gate recently? Records, guards, anything? Tawi shook her head. It's not a secured gate. It's within the inner palace, considered safe. No one keeps watch on it or records who passes through. Neferet felt frustration building but pushed it down. Evidence was evidence even if it didn't immediately point to a suspect. She had confirmed that Shadow was poisoned with oleander. She had found the mechanism of delivery, and she had narrowed down the general pool of suspects to those with access to the palace's inner grounds. We need to remove this plant and dispose of it safely, Neferet said. And we need to search the rest of the garden thoroughly to ensure there are no other dangers. Can you find me a pair of thick gloves and a sack? I'll need to handle this carefully. Tawi hurried away and returned a few minutes later with leather gloves and a sturdy canvas sack. Neferet donned the gloves and carefully lifted the pot, plant and all, placing it into the sack. She tied it closed and set it aside. Then she and Tawi spent the next hour going through every inch of the courtyard, checking every plant, every pot, every corner. They found nothing else suspicious, which was a relief, but also concerning. The oleander had been the only trap, which meant it had been specifically placed and tended. This wasn't random, it was targeted. As they finished their search, the afternoon shadows were lengthening. Neferet stood by the fountain thinking. The poisoner was still out there, somewhere in the palace. They knew their plan had failed because Shadow was recovering. What would they do now? Give up? Or try again, perhaps more directly this time? I need to speak with the queen, Neferet said. This courtyard needs to be restricted. Shadows should not be allowed out here until we're certain there's no more danger. And we need to discover who had knowledge of this garden, who knew Shadow's habits well enough to place the poison so precisely. As they turned to leave, Neferet caught movement from the corner of her eye. Someone standing in the shadows of the covered walkway watching. She turned quickly, but whoever it was had already melted back into the darkness, disappearing. Her skin prickled with unease. Had they been watched during the entire investigation? Did the poisoner now know that their mechanism had been discovered? Tawi, did you see that? Someone was watching us. The elderly woman squinted toward the walkway. My eyes aren't what they used to be, child. I saw nothing, but I believe you. Someone in this palace has evil intentions, and they're growing bolder. They hurried back to the queen's chambers, Neferet carrying the sack with the oleander plant, her mind racing. She needed to report what she'd found, but she also needed to be careful. If the poisoner knew their method had been discovered, they might panic. Panic made people dangerous and unpredictable. The queen was sitting beside Shadow when they entered. The cat was awake and had even eaten a small amount of fish, which was encouraging. But Nefertari's face was troubled, and Neferet saw immediately that something had happened. "What is it, your majesty?" Neferet asked, setting down the sack. "Tom's was here," the queen said, her voice tight with anger. "He came to examine Shadow, he said, to verify her improvement. But something about his manner was off. He was too interested in what you'd given her, what remedies you'd used. He kept asking about your methods, about the antidote. I told him it was Bastet's business, not his, and he left in a fury." Neferet felt a chill run down her spine. Tom's asking about the antidote, trying to understand what had countered the poison. That was the behavior of someone trying to understand what had gone wrong with their plan. "Your Majesty," Neferet said carefully, "I found the source of the poison. Oleander, planted in your garden where Shadow would encounter it. Whoever did this had detailed knowledge of the layout and of Shadow's habits. And just now, as we finished searching the garden, someone was watching us from the walkway. I couldn't see who, but I'm certain we were observed." The queen's face paled. "Then the danger is not over. They know you're investigating. They know Shadow survived. They might try again, or worse, they might target you next for interfering." "I have considered that," Neferet admitted, "but I'm not afraid. I'm protected by Bastet, and I will not let fear stop me from discovering the truth. But we need to be smart about this. We need to set a trap of our own." "What kind of trap?" The queen leaned forward, her eyes sharp with interest. "We let it be known that Shadow is still very sick, that she's not expected to survive much longer despite my efforts. We make it seem as though my remedies failed, that the poison is still working. If the poisoner believes they're succeeding, they may grow confident. Confident people make mistakes." The queen considered this, her fingers absently stroking Shadow's head. "It could work, but it also means maintaining the fiction that you've failed, that I'm still in despair. I'm not sure I can convincingly pretend that. Not when I'm so relieved that Shadow is recovering." "You don't have to convince everyone," Neferet said. "Just convince Ptams. He's the most likely suspect, and he's already shown he's watching closely. If we can lure him into revealing himself, we can stop him before he tries again." "Very well," the queen said after a long pause. "We'll do it. But Neferet, promise me you'll be careful. Whoever did this is ruthless and clever. I couldn't bear it if you came to harm trying to help me. I promise, your Majesty. I'll be very careful." Neferet touched the green amulet at her throat, feeling the thrum of protective magic within it. Bastet had brought her here for a purpose. She would not fail the goddess or the queen or Shadow. As night fell over Memphis, as the palace settled into its evening routines, Neferet stood at the window of her guest chambers looking out over the gardens. Somewhere out there, a poisoner walked free, believing they had gotten away with their crime. But they were wrong. Neferet would find them. She would expose them, and she would ensure they could never harm another innocent creature again. The hunt had truly begun. Neferet woke before dawn, as she always did, pulled from sleep by years of temple routine. For a moment, she was disoriented by the softness of the bed beneath her, by the painted walls around her, by the unfamiliar sounds of the palace waking. Then memory returned. Memphis. The palace, Shadow, the poison, the investigation. She rose and performed her morning ablutions, washing carefully in the basin of cool water that servants had left for her. She dressed in one of the fine linen dresses the queen had provided, feeling strange in such luxury, but understanding the need to look the part of a royal priestess. The green amulet went around her neck, and her sistrum was tucked into her belt. She was armed with the goddess's protection, and ready for whatever the day would bring. Before going to check on Shadow, Neferet allowed herself a moment of reflection. She sat on a cushion near the window and closed her eyes, reaching back through memory to her training at the temple, to the lessons that had shaped her into the healer she had become. She remembered her first day as a novice, how Merit had taken her to the herb garden and made her sit there for an entire day, just sitting, just watching, just listening. Before you can heal, Merit had said, you must learn to see, not just with your eyes, but with all your senses. You must learn to notice the small things, the subtle changes, the whispers of imbalance before they become shouts. So Neferet had sat in the garden from dawn until dusk, and at first it had seemed pointless. Just plants growing, bees humming, cats sleeping in the sun. But as the hours passed and her restless mind finally quieted, she began to truly see. She noticed which plants the bees preferred and which they avoided. She saw how the cats would sometimes eat certain grasses when their stomachs troubled them. She observed how some plants grew strong in the morning sun while others thrived in afternoon shade. Everything was connected. Everything communicated if you learned the language. The next lesson had been about patience. Merit had given her a willow tree and a knife and told her to harvest bark for pain medicine. But there was a right way and a wrong way to do it. Take too much bark and you would kill the tree. Take it from the wrong place and the wound would not heal. Take it at the wrong time of year and the medicine would be weak. Our healing is not about domination, Merit had taught. It is not about imposing your will on nature. It is about partnership, about working with the body's own wisdom, about supporting what already wants to happen. Life wants to live. Health wants to return. Your job is to remove the obstacles and provide what is needed. Neferet had learned to compound medicines, to dry and store herbs, to mix tinctures and salves and poultices. She had learned which plants calmed and which energized, which cooled fever and which warmed cold limbs. She had learned that sometimes the best medicine was simply time and care, that sometimes doing nothing was wiser than doing too much. But most importantly, she had learned about cats. The temple was full of them, and each one was a teacher. She learned to read their subtle communications, the position of ears and tail, the dilation of pupils, the quality of their meow or purr. She learned that cats hide their pain and illness as a survival instinct, that you had to watch for tiny changes in behavior to catch problems early. She learned that cats have no tolerance for certain medicines that work fine for humans, that their bodies process things differently. Old Shadow, the blind temple cat, had been one of her best teachers. The ancient feline had taught her about dignity in decline, about how to ease the aches of age without robbing an elder of their independence. When Shadow had finally died peacefully in her sleep at 19 years old, Neferet had wept, but she had also been grateful for all the cat had taught her. And Mew, dear Mew, had taught her about trust. The golden cat had been abused before coming to the temple, found starving and injured in an alley. It had taken months of patient, gentle care before Mew would let anyone touch her. Neferet had been the one to finally win her trust, spending hours just sitting near the cat, speaking softly, offering food, never forcing contact. The day Mew had finally climbed into her lap and purred had been one of the best days of Neferet's life. All of this training, all of these lessons had prepared her for this moment. Shadow's illness was complex, layered with both physical poison and what Neferet suspected was magical interference, but the principles remained the same. Observe, support the body's healing, remove obstacles, be patient, work with the natural wisdom of life. A knock at the door pulled her from her reverie. She opened it to find a young servant girl with a tray of food, bread, honey, dates, and a cup of something that steamed gently. "Breakfast, priestess," the girl said shyly. "The queen said you're to eat well. You'll need your strength for the day ahead." Neferet thanked her and took the tray. The steaming cup held the same spiced drink she'd had yesterday, and she recognized the taste now. Kaifi, a sacred temple incense sometimes made into a drink. It was said to soothe the spirit and sharpen the mind. The queen was taking good care of her. After eating, Neferet gathered her medicine chest and went to the queen's chambers. She found Nefertari already awake and dressed, sitting beside Shadow. The cat was noticeably stronger this morning. She was sitting up, her eyes bright and curious, watching a beam of sunlight move across the floor. "Good morning, Your Majesty," Neferet said, bowing. "Shadow looks much improved." "She is," the queen said with a smile that transformed her whole face. She even stood and walked a few steps this morning. It's the first time in days she's shown interest in moving. Your medicines are working miracles." "Bastet's medicines," Neferet corrected gently. "I'm just the instrument. But I'm glad to see such improvement, however. We must maintain our fiction. To anyone outside this chamber, Shadow is still very sick and expected to die soon. Can you act the part of a grieving queen for a while longer?" The queen's smile faded. "I can. I remember well enough how it felt yesterday when I thought I was losing her. I can summon those feelings if I must. But what's the next step in your plan? I need to investigate further. Tom's is our main suspect, but I need evidence, not just suspicion. I was thinking I might visit him, perhaps ask him questions about palace medicine, about his training. If I can get him talking, he might reveal something useful." "That's dangerous," the queen said, frowning. "If he is the poisoner, going directly to him could put you at risk. I'll be careful. I'll go as a humble priestess seeking to learn from the great physician. I'll flatter his pride. Men like Ptahms enjoy showing off their knowledge, and while he talks, I'll watch for signs of guilt or nervousness." The queen considered this. "Very well. But take Towie with you, or one of my guards. I want someone watching your back." "I'll take Towie." "A guard would make it too formal, too threatening. Towie can pose as my servant, and Tommy's won't see her as a danger. They spent the next hour tending to Shadow together. Neferet administered another dose of antidote and was pleased to see Shadow take it eagerly, licking the bowl clean afterward. The cat's appetite was returning, which was one of the best signs. Neferet examined her carefully, checking her gums, which were now pink and healthy, checking her eyes, which were clear and bright, feeling her heart, which beat strong and steady. Continue the antidote twice daily for another 3 days, Neferet instructed. After that, we can reduce it to once daily for a week, then stop altogether. The poison should be fully cleared from her system by then, but keep her diet simple for now. Plain fish, a little meat, nothing too rich. And watch her closely. If she shows any sign of relapse, any sign at all, send for me immediately. I will, the Queen promised. And what about her going outside the garden? Not yet. Not until we're certain it's safe. Keep her here where you can control everything she encounters. I know she must be bored, but it's for her protection. They arranged the fiction carefully. The Queen would let it be known through her handmaidens that Shadow had had a terrible night, that the priestess's medicines had failed, that death was now expected within days. The handmaidens would gossip with the servants. The servants would spread the word through the palace. By midday, everyone would believe Shadow was dying. Neferet found Towie and explained the plan. The elderly woman's eyes gleamed with fierce determination. I always knew there was something wrong with that Tames. Too smooth, too sure of himself. The best healers have humility because they know how much they don't know. He's all pride and no wisdom. They made their way through the palace to the medical wing, a section of buildings near the administrative complex where the royal physicians kept their workshops and consultation rooms. The corridors here smelled of herbs and medicines, familiar scents that reminded Neferet of the temple's healing rooms. Thomas's chamber was at the end of a long hallway. The door was open, and they could see him inside, bent over a table covered with scrolls and medical implements. He looked up as they approached, and his expression soured immediately when he saw Neferet. "Ah, priestess," he said, the word dripping with disdain. "I'm surprised you have the audacity to show your face here. I heard Shadow had a terrible night. I suppose your temple magic isn't quite as effective as you claimed." Neferet bowed humbly, playing her part. "That is why I've come, Physician Thomas. I must confess that I am out of my depth. My training is limited to simple temple practices, but you are a master of the healing arts. I was hoping you might consent to teach me, to help me understand where I went wrong. Perhaps together we can still save Shadow." The flattery worked exactly as she'd hoped. Tom's chest puffed out slightly, and his expression shifted from hostility to condescension. "Well, it's about time you recognized your limitations. Very well. I suppose I can spare a few minutes to educate you. Come in, come in." Neferet and Towie entered the chamber. It was large and well appointed, lined with shelves holding jars and boxes and scrolls. A large table dominated the center, covered with medical tools, bronze knives, bone saws, forceps, probes, all laid out with precise order. Along one wall stood a series of cabinets with small drawers, each labeled in hieratic script. "You must understand," Toms began, launching into what was clearly a well-practiced lecture, "that healing is a science, not superstition. It requires years of study, of learning the body's structure and function. The gods play their role, certainly, but one cannot rely on prayer alone. One must understand how the body works, how diseases progress, how medicines act upon the humors." He moved to his cabinets and began pulling out drawers, showing her their contents. Dried herbs, minerals, compounds she didn't recognize. He explained each one with obvious pride in his knowledge, going into elaborate detail about preparation and dosage and application. Neferet listened carefully, asking occasional questions to keep him talking, all the while watching his face, his hands, his movements. She was looking for any sign of nervousness, any indication that he was uncomfortable with her presence. At one point, he opened a drawer and pulled out a small vial. "This is one of my most potent preparations, distilled from the oleander plant. Highly toxic, of course, but in minute doses it can slow a racing heart. The difference between medicine and poison is often just a matter of quantity." Neferet felt her pulse quicken, but kept her expression neutral and curious. "Oleander. That's fascinating. I've heard of it, of course, but I've never worked with it. It's quite dangerous, isn't it?" "Extremely," Tom said, holding the vial up to the light. "Just a drop or two can kill a man within hours. For a small animal like a cat, even less would be required. One must handle it with great care and respect." He returned the vial to its drawer and locked it with a small key that he wore on a chain around his neck. Only master physicians should work with such powerful substances. The way he said it, the emphasis on his superiority, the casual mention of how little it would take to kill a cat, it all felt wrong to Neferet. But it wasn't proof. It was just suspicion confirmed. "Your knowledge is truly impressive," Neferet said. "I wonder, have you ever encountered a case where someone was poisoned gradually over time, rather than all at once? What would be the signs of such a thing?" Something flickered in Tom's eyes. Wariness, perhaps. "Why do you ask?" "I'm trying to understand shadow symptoms. The gradual decline, the lack of obvious cause. It made me wonder if perhaps slow poisoning might explain it." "Impossible," Tom said quickly. Too quickly. "Shadow was under my care. I would have detected any poison. No, the cat is simply old and failing. Sometimes there is no dramatic cause, no villain to blame. Sometimes life simply ends." But Neferet saw the tiny beads of sweat forming on his forehead, saw how his hands clenched slightly. He was nervous now, defensive. She had struck close to something. "Of course you're right," Neferet said, backing off, not wanting to push too hard. "I'm sure there's no poison involved. I just wish I understood better so I could help Shadow. But I fear it may be too late. The Queen is devastated." "Death comes to us all," Tom said, his voice regaining its smooth confidence. "Even to royal cats. The Queen will mourn, but she will recover. She has her duties to Egypt to console her. The callousness of it struck Neferet. No compassion, no real concern for either Shadow or the Queen, just cold calculation and barely concealed satisfaction. They talked a while longer, Tom's continuing to lecture about medicine and healing, clearly enjoying having an audience. But Neferet learned nothing more useful. When she finally made her excuses and left, thanking him effusively for his time, she felt certain of two things. First, Thomas had access to oleander and knowledge of how to use it as a slow-acting poison. Second, he was hiding something. The nervousness when she'd mentioned gradual poisoning, the quick dismissal of the idea, the sweat on his brow. He was involved somehow, but she still needed more. Suspicion wasn't enough. She needed to catch him in an act that would prove his guilt beyond doubt. As she and Tawi walked back through the palace corridors, the elderly woman spoke quietly. "Did you see how his hand shook when you mentioned the gradual poisoning? I've known guilty men before, and that was the face of one." "I saw it," Neferet confirmed. "But we need proof. We need to catch him doing something that can't be explained away. And I have an idea, but it's going to require patience and very careful timing." "What kind of idea?" Tawi asked. "We make him think his plan is succeeding. We make him think Shadow is about to die, and we watch to see what he does. If he's confident he's getting away with it, he might make a mistake. He might do or say something that reveals his guilt. Or better yet, he might have an accomplice, someone he reports to. If we can discover who that is, we've found the real mastermind behind this." Tawi nodded slowly. "It's risky. You're asking him to think he's won. But what if he decides to ensure Shadow dies? What if he tries to finish what he started?" "Then we catch him in the act," Neferet said grimly. "And we have our proof. But we'll need to be vigilant, starting tonight. Someone needs to watch Shadow's chamber at all times, and we need to be ready to act if anything happens." They returned to the Queen's chambers and explained Neferet's plan. The Queen listened carefully, her face growing more determined with each word. "I'll arrange for guards," she said. "Hidden, so they're not obvious, but watching. And I'll let it be known through the handmaidens that Shadow is failing rapidly, that she's expected to die tonight or tomorrow. If Toms is going to make a move, it will be soon." That evening, as the sun set over Memphis and the palace prepared for night, Neferet took up her position in a small antechamber connected to the Queen's bedroom. From here, she could see Shadow's couch through a gap in the curtains. The Queen pretended to retire early, exhausted by days of worry and grief. The handmaidens left. The lamps were dimmed. To all appearances, the Queen slept, and Shadow lay dying. But Neferet was awake and watching. Tawi was hidden in another room. Guards were stationed in the corridor outside, dressed as servants but armed and alert. They were all waiting for someone to make a mistake, waiting for the poisoner to reveal themselves, waiting for justice to finally have its day. The hours crawled by. Midnight came and went. The palace grew silent, and still Neferet watched, her eyes burning with fatigue but her will unshaken. She would not let Shadow be harmed again. She would not let this crime go unpunished. And then, just before dawn, she heard it. The soft scrape of a door opening, the whisper of sandals on stone. Someone was entering the queen's chambers. Someone who thought everyone was asleep. Someone who had come to finish what they'd started. Neferet's hand closed around her sistrum. Her other hand touched the amulet at her throat. She whispered a prayer to Bastet and prepared to act. The hunt was about to reach its climax. Neferet moved silently from her hiding place, her bare feet making no sound on the cool stone floor. Through the gap in the curtains she could see a figure moving through the darkness of the queen's chamber, creeping toward Shadow's couch, with the stealth of someone accustomed to moving unseen. The figure was smaller than she'd expected. Not Tom's, someone else. Neferet's heart pounded as she watched the intruder reach Shadow's couch. In the dim light of the single lamp left burning, she could see a hand extending, holding something. A cloth, perhaps, or a small vial. The hand moved toward Shadow's water bowl. "Now," Neferet whispered, and shook her sistrum once, sharply. The sound rang through the chamber like an alarm bell. The queen sat up from where she'd been pretending to sleep. The hidden guards burst through the doors. Towie emerged from her concealment, and Neferet stepped through the curtains, her green amulet glowing faintly with protective magic. The intruder spun around, dropping whatever they'd been holding. In the sudden illumination, as the guards lit more lamps, Neferet could finally see clearly. It was a young woman, perhaps 20 years old, dressed in the simple white linen of a palace servant. Her face was twisted with fear and guilt, her eyes wide with panic. She tried to run, but the guards were faster, seizing her arms and holding her firmly. "Please," the girl sobbed. "Please, I didn't want to. He made me. He said he'd tell my father about the stolen grain, that my family would be ruined. Please." "Who made you?" the queen demanded, rising from her bed with fury in her voice. "Who ordered you to poison my cat?" "Physician Tom's, your majesty," the girl wept. "He said Shadow needed medicine, that I was to put drops in her water bowl and her food. He said it was to help her, but I knew it was wrong. The way he looked when he said it, the way he smiled. But I was afraid. My family, they would have been destroyed if I refused." Neferet moved to the water bowl and carefully examined what the girl had dropped. A small vial, its stopper removed, some of the contents spilled on the floor. She sniffed carefully, then recoiled. Oleander extract heavily concentrated. A single drop in Shadow's water would have killed her within hours. "Your Majesty," Neferet said, her voice hard, "this is pure poison. If Shadow had drunk from this bowl, nothing could have saved her." The queen's face was white with rage. "Take her to the cells. I want her guarded closely. She will answer every question we have, and then she will testify against Tom's." She turned to one of the guards. "Send for the captain of the guard. Tell him to arrest Physician Tom's immediately. I want him in chains and brought before Pharaoh to answer for this crime." The guards hauled the weeping girl away. Neferet carefully collected the vial and the spilled poison, sealing them in a container to be used as evidence. The queen stood trembling, not with fear, but with the force of her anger. "To think," she said, her voice shaking, "that I trusted him, that I let him into my chambers, let him near Shadow. He could have killed her at any time, but he chose this slow, cruel method. Why? What did he hope to gain? Permission to harm you, perhaps," Neferet said quietly. "With Shadow gone, your grief would have made you vulnerable. Or perhaps it was political. You said the new vizier Setnacht resents your influence with Pharaoh. If you were distracted by grief, unable to counsel Pharaoh effectively, Setnacht's own power would grow. Then we need to discover if Tams was working alone or if he had a sponsor." The queen's eyes were fierce. "This conspiracy may run deeper than we know." The rest of the night was chaos. The captain of the guard arrived with a full squad of armed men and stormed the medical wing. They found Tams in his chambers, already dressed and packing a bag, clearly preparing to flee. He fought when they tried to arrest him, actually drawing a knife and wounding one guard before being subdued. That violence, more than anything, confirmed his guilt. By dawn, he was in the palace cells, and the palace was abuzz with the news. The queen's physician arrested for attempting to murder the royal cat. It was scandal of the highest order, and rumors flew through every corridor and courtyard. Neferet was summoned to Pharaoh's presence at mid-morning. She had never seen Rameses the Great, and the reality of him was overwhelming. He sat on his throne in the great audience hall, enormous and powerful, his face stern beneath the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt. The queen sat beside him, and around them stood the highest officials of the kingdom. Neferet prostrated herself on the floor, forehead pressed to the cool stone, hardly daring to breathe. "Rise, priestess of Bastet," Pharaoh's voice boomed through the hall. "We have heard of your service to our beloved wife and to her companion Shadow. Speak now, and tell us what you have discovered." Neferet rose on shaking legs and told the story from the beginning. Her arrival, Shadow's symptoms, the discovery of the poison, the trap they'd set, the servant girl's confession. She spoke clearly and truthfully, leaving nothing out. When she finished, Pharaoh turned to his captain. "Bring the prisoner." Tommies was dragged into the hall in chains, his fine robes torn and dirty, his face bruised from his resistance. But even in chains he held himself with arrogance, his chin high, his eyes defiant. "Tom's former physician," Pharaoh said, his voice like thunder. "You are accused of attempting to murder a royal cat, of poisoning, of conspiracy. What say you?" "I say that you are all fools," Tom spat. "You waste time and resources on a mere animal, while Egypt's real problems go unaddressed. That cat has more comfort, more attention, more care than thousands of your subjects. It's obscene. I did what I did to make a point, to show how your priorities are twisted." The hall erupted in outraged murmurs. The queen's face went white, then red with fury. You poisoned an innocent creature to make a political statement?" Pharaoh's voice was deadly quiet now, which was somehow more terrifying than his earlier boom. "You violated trust abused your position, corrupted a servant girl, all to prove some twisted philosophy. It's not a philosophy, it's truth, Tom shouted. Look at this priestess, this girl playing at healing. You trust her over trained physicians because she whispers prayers and waves amulets. You're all being led by superstition instead of reason. Egypt needs to wake up to embrace science over magic, to stop coddling women who think they can rule alongside men. Ah, there it was. The real poison, not in any vial, but in Tom's heart. Resentment of women in power. Contempt for those he considered beneath him. Pride that had curdled into cruelty. Did you work alone? Pharaoh demanded. Or did someone else sponsor this crime? Tommies laughed bitterly. Alone. No one else had the courage of their convictions. But there are many in this palace who agree with me, who see what I see. You just don't know who they are. Take him away, Pharaoh commanded. He will be judged according to the law. The penalty for harming a cat in Egypt is severe. For attempting to harm a royal cat, it is death. Tommies was dragged out, still ranting about science and superstition, his voice echoing through the hall until distance finally silenced it. Pharaoh turned to Neferet. You have done us great service, priestess. Name your reward, and if it is within our power, it shall be yours. Neferet thought of all the things she could ask for, gold, position, land, but only one thing mattered to her. Great Pharaoh, I ask only this, that I be allowed to return to my temple in Bastet. The festival of Bastet begins in 3 days, and it is my sacred duty to attend. I have been away too long, and I miss my home. The queen smiled, pride and fondness in her expression. Pharaoh nodded slowly. A modest request, but one that shows wisdom. You shall return to your temple with our blessing, and with gifts appropriate to the great service you have rendered. But first stay 1 more day, rest, recover your strength. You have earned it. The audience was dismissed. As Neferet left the great hall, the queen caught up with her in the corridor. Thank you, Nefertari said, taking both Neferet's hands in hers. You saved Shadow's life. You saved me from grief that might have broken me. I will never forget what you've done. I only did what Bastet called me to do, Your Majesty. Shadow is a sacred cat, beloved by the goddess. Of course I would help her. Come with me, the queen said. I have something to show you. They returned to the queen's chambers, where Shadow was lounging on her couch, looking remarkably healthy and content. The cat's coat had regained its luster, and her eyes were bright and alert. When she saw Neferet, she stood and stretched luxuriously, then padded over to rub against Neferet's legs, purring loudly. She knows you saved her, the queen said softly. She's been asking for you all morning. Neferet knelt and gathered the cat into her arms, feeling the vibration of Shadow's purr against her chest. I'm so glad you're well, little one. So glad. The queen reached into a carved chest and pulled out a beautiful collar. It was made of gold and lapis lazuli, with tiny bells that chimed musically. This is for you, a priestess collar, but finer than any I've seen. Wear it with honor. You've earned it. She also presented Neferet with a leather bag heavy with gold coins. For your temple, to care for the sacred cats, to repair whatever needs repairing, to buy whatever you need. Consider it a donation from a grateful queen. Your Majesty, this is too much. It's not nearly enough, the queen said firmly. You gave me back something precious. Let me give you something in return." That evening, the queen hosted a feast in Neferet's honor. The great dining hall was filled with nobles and officials, all curious to meet the priestess who had solved the mystery and saved the royal cat. Neferet felt overwhelmed by the attention, but she bore it with as much grace as she could manage. The food was extraordinary. Roasted geese and ducks, fish prepared a dozen different ways, bread and cakes and fruits, wine that tasted of honey and flowers. Musicians played harps and flutes. Dancers performed with acrobatic grace. It was a celebration unlike anything Neferet had ever experienced. But through it all, she found herself thinking of Bastet, of the temple, of Mew and her kittens. 3 days until the festival of Bastet. She would be there. She would make it in time. The next morning, Neferet prepared for her departure. She packed her bags with the gifts the queen had given her, plus supplies and medicines that the royal physicians, the ones who hadn't tried to poison anyone, had assembled for her. Fine herbs, rare ingredients, tools she'd never have been able to afford on her own. The queen came to see her off personally, with Shadow in her arms. The cat looked healthy and content, and she touched her nose to Neferet's hand in farewell. "Travel safely," the queen said, "and know that you always have a place here if you need it. If you ever require anything, send word and it will be done. Thank you, your majesty, for everything." A royal boat was waiting at the dock, the same one that had brought Neferet to Memphis, but now loaded with supplies and gifts. Bastet, the messenger, would accompany her back to Bastet to ensure her safe arrival. As the boat pulled away from the dock and began its journey south, Neferet stood in the prow and watched Memphis recede behind her. What an adventure it had been, what lessons she had learned. But now she was going home, back to where she belonged. The journey took 2 days of steady travel. They sailed through the afternoon and evening of the first day, then moored for the night at a small village. Neferet slept on deck under the stars, lulled by the gentle rocking of the boat and the whisper of the river. The second day dawned bright and clear. As they sailed, Neferet could feel the anticipation building. They were getting closer. The landscape was becoming familiar. And then in the late afternoon she saw it. The white walls of Bastet rising above the palm groves, the temple shining in the sun. "There," she breathed. "There it is. Home." The boat pulled up to the city dock just as the sun was beginning to set. Neferet gathered her bags, thanked Bastet profusely, and practically ran through the streets toward the temple. The festival of Bastet had already begun. The city was full of pilgrims who had come from all over Egypt to honor the goddess. Music and laughter filled the air. People danced in the streets. The smell of incense and roasted meat wafted from every corner. But Neferet bypassed the celebrations and headed straight for the temple gates. The moment she crossed the threshold, she felt peace settle over her like a blessing. This was where she belonged. This was home. Merit was in the courtyard, supervising preparations for tomorrow's great procession. When she saw Neferet, her face lit up with joy and relief. Neferet, you're back. We've been so worried. The Queen sent a messenger ahead saying you'd saved the royal cat from poison and uncovered a conspiracy. Is it true? It's true, Neferet said, embracing her mentor. But I'll tell you all about it later. First, I need to know about Mew. Did she... Merit's smile widened. Come see for yourself. She led Neferet to her old chamber. There, on the sleeping mat, was Mew surrounded by 5 healthy kittens. 4 were golden like their mother, and 1 was black with white paws. They were perhaps 10 days old, their eyes just beginning to open, their tiny mews filling the air. Mew looked up as Neferet entered, and the cat's purr was like thunder. She stood carefully, stepping over her kittens, and came to Neferet, rubbing against her legs, touching her nose to Neferet's hand, welcoming her home. "Oh, Mew," Neferet whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You did so well. They're beautiful, perfect." She sank down beside the sleeping mat and gently stroked each kitten, feeling their soft fur, their tiny bodies warm and alive. Gifts from Bastet, 5 new lives to care for, to protect, to love. Merit settled beside her. "Tell me everything." So Neferet told the story of Shadow and the poison, of Tom's and his bitterness, of the Queen's gratitude and Pharaoh's judgment. She showed Merit the gold collar and the bag of coins, explained that they were gifts for the temple. "You've done well," Merit said when she finished. "You've brought honor to Bastet and to our order. But more than that, you've shown that healing is about more than just herbs and potions. It's about justice, about protection, about standing against those who would do harm. I'm proud of you, daughter." The next day was the height of the festival of Bastet. The great procession began at dawn, with the statue of the goddess carried through the streets on a golden bark. Priests and priestesses walked alongside, shaking sistrums, singing hymns of praise. Behind them came thousands of pilgrims, dancing and celebrating, their voices raised in joy. Neferet walked in her place among the priestesses, wearing her new gold collar, her sistrum chiming in time with the others. The sun shone bright overhead. The Nile sparkled in the distance, and everywhere she looked she saw cats, sitting on walls, watching from doorways, being carried by their devoted humans. All children of Bastet, all sacred, all blessed. The procession wound through Bubastis, through streets lined with cheering crowds, past houses where families had set out offerings of milk and fish. It ended at the great temple where sacrifices were made, prayers offered, and the goddess honored with song and dance. That evening, as the celebration continued into the night, with feasting and music, Neferet slipped away to her chamber. She found Mew nursing her kittens, the little family peaceful and content. Neferet settled beside them, stroking Mew's head gently. "I'm home," she whispered. "I'm home, and I'm not leaving again. I've had my adventure, and it was important. But this is where I belong. Here with you, with the temple, with the goddess. This is my calling." Mew purred in agreement, her golden eyes half closed with contentment. Outside, the festival music played on. Inside, in the quiet chamber, a priestess and a cat and 5 newborn kittens rested together, surrounded by peace and love and the eternal blessing of Bastet. The adventure was over. The mystery was solved. Shadow lived. Justice had been served. And Neferet had learned that sometimes the greatest heroism wasn't in grand gestures or dramatic confrontations, but in simple devotion and careful observation, in refusing to give up on a life that others had dismissed as not worth saving. She thought of Shadow, recovering in the Queen's chambers. She thought of Tom's facing judgment for his crimes. She thought of the Queen finally able to rest knowing her beloved companion was safe. And she thought of Merritt's words. Healing is about more than herbs and potions. It's about justice, about protection, about standing against those who would do harm. Neferet touched the green amulet at her throat, feeling the warmth of Bastet's protection. She had been called to Memphis for a reason. She had been tested and had not been found wanting. And now she was home, ready to continue her work, ready to serve the goddess in all the small and large ways that service required. One of the kittens, the black one with white paws, mewed softly and climbed into Neferet's lap. She picked it up gently, cradling it against her chest, feeling its tiny heartbeat against her palm. "I think I'll call you Shadow," she murmured, "in honor of the cat whose life reminded me why this work matters. Every life is sacred. Every creature deserves care and protection. And those of us who hear the calling must answer it no matter where it leads." The kitten purred and curled up in her lap, already trusting, already content. And Neferet sat in the lamplight, surrounded by cats and peace, knowing that she was exactly where the goddess intended her to be. Tomorrow would bring new work, new challenges, new cats to tend and heal. But tonight was for rest, for gratitude, for the simple joy of being home. The festival of Bastet continued outside, would continue for days yet. But Neferet had already found what she was celebrating: the blessing of purpose, the gift of calling, the sacred duty of caring for the goddess's children. She was a healer, a priestess, a protector of cats, and a servant of the divine. And she would spend the rest of her days honoring that calling, one small act of devotion at a time. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead, eternal and unchanging. The Nile flowed on, ancient and powerful, and in a small chamber in the temple of Bastet, a young priestess held a kitten and smiled, content with the life the goddess had given her. This was her story, this was her purpose, this was enough.